So we're now going to move on to elements of the CV. So the CV formatting is its unlimited length. It can be up to 8 pages long. And it should have 10 to 12 point traditional font with Arial, Helvetica, or Times New Roman fonts. It should have 1-inch margins. And after the first page with your name, every page after should include the page number and your last name so that all the documents can be kept together. For publications, you want to use an appropriate citation style for your discipline. So pick a journal that is the gold standard in your field and follow that citation style. Also, the document should have a fair amount of white space. If it is text heavy, the reviewer is not going to want to read it. People have done studies and reviewers' eyes are going to focus more on bullet points where there is less, on like smaller bullet points as opposed to very text heavy paragraphs. So make sure that there is a fair amount of white space in the document. And then order matters. That first page or two is the prime real estate. It's what they're going to spend the most time looking at. So you want the most relevant qualifications to be on those first 2 pages. So that means that your sections should be ordered from most to least relevant based on the institution you're applying. And then within each section, the entries should be in reverse chronological order. And lastly, you want to use visual emphasis with bolding, underlining, or italics to call the reader's attention to specific components of the CV, but don't overuse it. If you overuse it, the page will look too busy and it'll be hard for them to read. Okay, so common CV pitfalls are the CV is one size fits all. You make one CV and you send it to 30 different institutions. You tell instead of show, or you are deceptive. And so we'll talk about how to avoid those. So for one size fits all, you are going to have a couple different CVs. You're going to tailor them based on the institutional priorities, the job type, and the student population. So if you're applying to a medical center, then maybe you're going to want to be able to include your experience with collaborating, with medical research labs. Or if you're going to be applying to research and teaching schools, you're going to want to have that teaching and mentoring experience early on in the CV. If the students at that school are historically unrepresented in STEM, mentioning your experience working with those populations is going to be important in your CV. So you're going to have a couple of CVs that you're going to send in to different institutions based on what their priorities are. So you're also going to be telling instead of showing. So this is, a CV is different from a resume in that it's going to be just the facts as opposed to trying to sell yourself. So you're going to want to avoid wordiness, stick to what the facts are. So what publications do you have? What funding do you have? And when something is sort of vague or unclear, like perhaps it's a niche research award that you got at UT that someone at UCLA will not know what that means, you'll then describe the information so that they get the context of what that means. But you only do that when necessary, if the award isn't widely recognized or understood. And then last, deception. This is the most tricky part. You're going to want to be very accurate when you're indicating publication status, co-authorship. What was your role when you were teaching? Were you instructor of record or were you a teaching assistant? For grants, did you accept a grant or decline it? Did you contribute to a PI's grant versus in terms of writing, or did you only provide preliminary data? Reviewers will be upset if they feel like you tried to deceive them by inflating your publication list or making it seem like you won awards that you didn't. So you want to be extremely careful in how you communicate your accomplishments. So we're going to go over some example section headings, and the ones we're gonna go into more depth. So we're covering education, research and teaching experience, funding, publications and presentations, academic appointments and professional experience. Some of you might not know what that is, and we'll go into that. Mentoring experience and references. So your header of your CV is going to be followed immediately by your education. Education is always the first section in a CV. And so if you are a postdoc and you've already graduated from your PhD, you'll include the degree in your header with your name. Underneath your name on the left-hand side, you're going to include your current department and university. Reviewers are going to look at this early on to understand what's the reputation of your current university. The right-hand side is where you put personal contact information, so always include your email and phone number. It is not necessary to include your personal address. That's less common anymore. And I also want to emphasize that it is not the norm in the US to include your visa status or your marital status or a photo. None of that information should be considered as part of the hiring process. You then have your education section where you list your previous degrees. And if you are currently a PhD student and you have not yet graduated, you should include expected before your expected graduation date. And you want to be as accurate as possible when you're indicating your time of graduation. Okay, so the next section is research experience. So I included just one element of a research experience. So for this example person, they're a postdoc at UT Austin in biomedical engineering. So you lead with the current title and the university, what department or school you're in, and then your advisor's name. This is important for reviewers. They want to see if they know who your advisor is, what is the reputation of that advisor in science. So then your first few bullet points are going to be research accomplishment statements. So did you develop a new technique, characterize, some sort of disease or some sort of mutant cell type, and to include that information, kind of summarize it in short lines so that they understand your overall research accomplishments and they understand how your research fits into the research context of that university. After you discuss sort of your broad accomplishments in research, you can include other bullet points like collaborations and mentorship. So collaborations, if you collaborated with someone at UT or outside of UT, indicate that. What's their name, what's their university, and what project did you collaborate on? Also, did it result in any publications? You want to include that as well. And then especially if you're applying to research and teaching roles or teaching roles, you're going to want to mention your mentorship of people in the lab. So include how many graduate and undergraduate students did you mentor? And what was their productivity? Did they help, were they co-authors on a paper that you ultimately submitted? Or did they present a poster at some research conference? Talking about your ability to mentor someone in the lab and for them to be able to succeed and be productive scientifically. And then lastly, you're going to have a line that is that summarizes your publications, your productivity, and your funding. This allows them to see what publications and what funding is associated with which research experiences. And also it puts it early on in that first page so they can see, oh, they got this grant from the NIH, or they have 2 publications from their postdoc, and that's indicated early on in the CV. Okay, so teaching experience. I understand STEM, especially for postdocs, it can be very difficult to get teaching experience. And so there are questions about how do you include that in a CV when you've had minimal teaching experience. So my recommendation is to include everything that you've ever done. So in here, there's a mix of, if you happen to get a full-time adjunct position at a local university, then definitely include that. But even if you were only brought in for 1 or 2 lectures at, Austin Community College or in a course at UT Austin, include that as your teaching experience. Guest lectureships is totally viable in this section. And make sure to include if you have any teaching assistant roles or teaching instructor roles from when you were a grad student. So it's really important, this is getting at deception. You want to be very accurate about what your instructor level was. If you were a guest instructor, you want to make that clear and say you only taught 2 lectures, versus if you were an adjunct professor and you were the instructor of record, meaning you were the sole person responsible for that entire course. Also, teaching assistant, did you lead a lecture or a discussion section? Make those differences matter, and so you want to be very honest and open about that. And then if teaching is important for the role, they are going to want to see information, see these lines below the department and the course name. They're going to want to see how many students were in that class. What was the level of the course? Was it introductory, upper division? What kind of class was it? Was it a lecture, a lab, a discussion section? And then what did you do? How often did the course meet? What were the lengths of the discussion sections or lectures? Did you have to be involved in the lab, and what did that involve? Were there any interactive, or pedagogical methods that you incorporated into your teaching, like clicker questions or think, pair, share, or problem solving? This will become really important when you're applying to research and teaching roles or teaching roles. They want to see you describe how you taught. And then last thing, for the course name, you definitely want to include the course name and course area so that they know what it means. If you just put Bio 303, someone at another university does not know what Bio 303 means at UT Austin. So make sure you include the course name itself. Okay, research funding. So research funding, especially for research and teaching and research intensive roles, is going to be really critical. They want to see, do you have the ability to support your research? Do you have grant writing experience, and is your research financially viable? So I recommend including all of your experience with grant writing. So that can be broken down into sections. There are some research fellowships that you won on your own, perhaps an NSF Graduate Research Fellowship or an NIH F32. You want to indicate that you have individual research fellowships where you as a scientist alone were evaluated. But they're also looking at, can this person perhaps write their own R01 once they start? And I know that many of you have not had that experience. That's reserved for the principal investigator of a lab. But did you contribute to your advisor's R01 submission process at all? Did you develop the preliminary data? Did you help come up with one of the aims? Did you even write some of the material that was submitted? You should include that and have that section be called something like Contributions to Funded Research, making this title extremely clear that this is not your R01, but you have been involved in an R01 grant writing process before, and indicate who is the actual PI on the R01 and what was your role in the development of that grant. For your own individual research fellowships, you're going to want to lead with the name of the award and include the funding agency, the total amount of the award, the number of years you were given that money. So include, if you were given $50,000 a year for 3 years, say you got $150,000 award over 3 years, and include the dates that the award was given to you. Did you apply to multiple fellowships to get funding for your postdoc, and maybe you were awarded 2 or 3 and you had to pick which one to do because you couldn't do them all? You can include awards or fellowships that you were given but ultimately did not accept because you accepted something else. However, you want to make it clear in the research funding that you declined that award. So they don't think that you actually so they don't think that you've actually used that funding. So make sure you include this declined notation here. So again, going back to contributions to funded research, make sure that if you include this section and you talk about your advisor's grant that you helped out with, your advisor needs to be on board with that. They need to know that you're writing this. They need to agree with your level of contribution and be willing to back it up in a letter or a phone call with the hiring committee. If they say, oh, I don't think they were really that involved, that is a major red flag for your application. So if you're including a section like this, which I recommend to include if you have this experience, make sure you discuss with your PI that you guys are in agreement about what exactly your role was in this process, and that they're okay with you including it in your CV. Publications. So your publications, deception is a major factor here. You want to be extremely clear that you don't conflate peer-reviewed research articles with a review or a submitted research article. That's why I recommend breaking it down into sections. So here I did peer-reviewed research articles, so any articles that have been published or maybe have been accepted and are currently in press. And then separate a section for submitted research articles, and separate a section for anything that was not peer reviewed, like review or a book chapter, or that wasn't original research. In these citations, you're going to use a common citation style for your field. So here I followed the journal Cell's citation format, and you're going to want to bold your name with each citation. You're going to want to make your titles extremely clear about what the nature of the publication is. And you can include in the title here, like submitted research articles, and then in parentheses at the end, has it been submitted? Has it been, is it in review? Has it already been revised and resubmitted for review? Indicate that with your article so they don't think that you're inflating your publication list with a bunch of articles that have not been through peer review and have not been put in press. Presentations. Replicate the same citation style from your publication section. And so after title, put the location. Was it a departmental seminar or was it a conference? And then the location, the city and state, or country if it was international. And here it's important again to be very clear with your subheadings about what the nature of the presentation was. Don't conflate an invited talk with an oral presentation where you submitted an abstract and then were selected. That is a selected presentation, not an invited presentation. An invited presentation is when a department or a conference or another professor reached out to you and said, I've read your work and I would like you to present at this meeting or this conference or this seminar series. You do not need to apply to get that role. Versus an oral presentation, you saw a call for abstracts, you submitted an abstract and you got selected for a talk. You're going to indicate that as an oral presentation as opposed to an invited talk. And then you can include a poster presentation section as well. So professional experience and academic appointments, these are optional sections, but based on your experience, they might be nice to include. So for example, did you engage in industry research between undergrad and grad school? So did you work at Regeneron or Genentech or Dow Chemical? And so you can indicate that industry experience in your professional experience section. And then academic appointments is not an incredibly common section, but I'm including it because it can be a nice way to highlight formal teaching roles early on in the CV. So if you're applying to a mixed research and teaching university, that first page is prime real estate. So this section can serve a nice dual purpose of highlighting both your research roles as a postdoc and a graduate student researcher, but also you can include your academic, your teaching roles in academia. So were you an adjunct professor? Were you a guest lecturer? Were you a graduate teaching assistant? And so this can be a section you can add if you'd like early on so that your first page can summarize both your research and teaching experience. Mentoring experience. This is an important section if you are going to research and teaching or teaching institutions. They're going to want to see your evidence of serving students and working with a diverse group of students in the lab, and specifically they're going to want to know the name of that student, what was their status at the time that you were mentoring them. So were they a grad student, an undergraduate student, a rotation student? The date, the length of time that you mentored them, so the years, and then also their current status. They want to see where that student is now. Did they stay in research? Did they go to medical school? Did they go into industry? And then lastly, your references. So this will be a list of 3 to 4 references that need to be pre-approved. You need to have already gotten your advisors to sign, or your references to sign on to serving this role in your application process. And what you're going to include is their name, their position, so they're professor, associate professor, what university they're at, their phone number, and their email. And optionals, you can include their relationship. So you could say principal investigator in postdoctoral research, collaborator in postdoctoral research, principal investigator in graduate research, if you'd like to include that indication of who these people are. So additional example section headings we don't have time to go over, but can be often seen in CVs, can include academic service, administrative experience. So did you serve on any committees? Did you help review any articles? Are you in a committee for a national society? And then community service and community outreach. Do you engage in a public STEM education day? Do you mentor or tutor students at a local high school? Honors and awards are going to be more like one-time financial awards or honors bestowed. So it's different from fellowships where it's not a continuation of funding, but perhaps you got best talk at a conference and you got a $5,000 prize for having best talk. You can include your leadership positions, your patents, if you have patented or been involved in the patent process, some of your research. If you have a lot of teaching experience, you did any pedagogical training, for example, the teaching preparation series at the Faculty Innovation Center, you can explain that process under this section. Professional activities, professional development, and professional memberships can include your membership to different academic societies, your involvement in them, your peer review of articles, and university service is very similar to academic service. A lot of these sections are somewhat interchangeable. They just have different names. So I'm going to open it up to questions now. Can I include the publication if I'm acknowledged in a high impact journal? Oh, if you're not an author on it, I wouldn't include it, but we can talk more about that specifically. Another question is the published papers that have been presented in another conference is reiterated under the 2 headings. Is that okay? Okay, so yeah, if you gave a talk and you gave a poster presentation on the same research project at 2 different conferences, you can include those. Every presentation you did, it doesn't have to be new material that you include. If you presented on the same research project 3 different times at 3 different conferences, you can include it. How far back can we go for teaching experience? To undergrad if we had such a position. You can include it, but you should be aware that they're going to be looking primarily at your graduate and your postdoctoral experience. Undergraduate is nice to include if you want, but they're going to take that with more of a grain of salt. Should internal fellowships be included with research funding? Yes, internal fellowships can be included. You definitely want to add a bullet point though underneath that explains like, this is a $85,000 award that's awarded to the top graduate students at UT Austin or something like that to explain what that specific fellowship means because someone at another university won't understand it. Do conference papers that are published in proceeding be included in paper? I would have a separate section to be conference papers or like conference papers in proceeding. I wouldn't include that as published in a peer-reviewed journal. Okay, so if you are not lead author on a publication, should you add a line about what your contribution was, i.e. created figures, contributed data? If you have very few publications, you maybe could do that, but I lean towards no, that you can include that more in your research experience under sort of what the productivity was. So you produced a significant amount, produced 2 figures for a paper that you were second author on or something. If you include bullet points underneath your publications about what your role was in that publication, that section is going to look very messy very quickly, and it's a really important section for reviewers to look at. They want it to be very clean and easy to read. And they understand what second and third authorship can mean. So I would include that information on what your contribution was specifically under research experience. So for peer reviews that we've oversaw, how should we handle that? In my field, peer review is typically anonymous. So I wouldn't say what article you reviewed, but if you could say that you contributed to peer review of X number of articles from these journals, I think that level of detail is okay. Should we include gray publications such as technical reports or government reports? Yes, you can, but you want to indicate specifically, have it as a subheading under publications, say something like technical reports, and then use the citation formatting that works for those. You don't want to include those. Peer-reviewed research articles should be very exclusive to articles that have been published or are in press in peer-reviewed publications, and specifically like academic publications, so Journal of Cell Biology, PNAS, PLOS One. What if for the same conference proceeding I also did presentations? You can include both. Put it in every presentation and publication that you have. It's fine if several of them will have the same titles. Just make sure that you indicate what the conference was and what year it was and what the location was. Conferences in the age of COVID, great question. I'm glad this came up. You can have under conferences, you can like list if you were selected for a talk or if you were going to give a poster, you can put in parentheses at the end, conference canceled due to COVID, and everyone will understand what that means. Yeah, if you were selected for a talk or a poster at a conference and it didn't happen, you can still put it on your CV. That's going to be a huge component of CVs coming forward, and over the next year, everyone's going to have canceled conferences in their CV. Internal university-wide presentations as an undergrad, you can, so that could be under oral presentation or an invited talk. So where you, for an oral presentation, like did your department have a research symposium and did you apply with an abstract and they picked you, put that under oral presentation. Oral presentation does not have to be just national conferences. Where should preprints be placed? If something has been put in a preprint like bioRxiv but has not yet been peer reviewed, put it in submitted publications, and then you can put the bioRxiv link at the end so that they know that you've done a preprint. But that shouldn't be under peer reviewed because a preprint is not peer reviewed. So put it under submitted publication.